Welcome back to Endless Tangents. I'm your host, Twiggles, with my co-host, Zamb1esaurus. How are you, Zambies?
I am exhausted.
Boy, long day?
Long day, and that goal I set last year of trying to triathlons, I have to train like 10 to 20 hours a week, which means
Keeping fit.
Yeah.
Hard work,
I'm
man.
trying to keep fit, but I'm not fit. So my body is shutting down on me. It wants to go to sleep.
A for effort. But here we are again for episode 2. Just a quick recap for those that tuned into episode 1. We've been working on our sleep and setting our goals. Just curious, how's your progress been tracking? I know you just mentioned the triathlon. Did you set any other goals in addition to that? Because that's already quite a lofty one.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because I don't think I actually had a goal mentioned in the first episode, which, of course, it's appropriate for our endless tangents. But my goal this year is to lower my cholesterol. So I'm a type 2 diabetic, and I have a laundry list of problems, just like everyone else. And cholesterol is one it's like almost in range, but it's just not. And seeing the amount of people I know as they get older start to have problems, I want to get it under control and not have to worry about it, not think about it anymore. So that's my goal for this year.
Good for you, man. It is definitely important. I agree with you that as we start to get older in our age, you start to see the reality of the decisions you made when you were younger, right? No longer can we just go out and party all night or have fun and do things, right, and eat poorly. Mm-hmm. Those ramifications are starting to catch up. You know, your body starts to not feel so great. Parts of the body start to feel more sore, right? And even from just doing the most random trivial things, right? Any basic sports, just, you kind of turn the wrong way and all of a sudden you're down for the count, So
yeah, I mean, you turn the wrong way when you're getting out of bed.
Yeah, absolutely. It has happened. Exactly. So going back to my goals, something I've been focusing on is just being more intentional with my bedtime. And I think one of the things that helped me that I'm going to attempt to try and see and get this into place is I always notice that I sleep procrastinate at the end of the night. I always want to do things. I don't feel like I have enough time to myself. And then I kind of go down that just rabbit hole of either YouTube shorts or something else that just eats up my time. But even things that I'm intentionally trying to do. So one of the other goals I've been working on that I've been pretty successful with over the past year has been meal prepping, right? So as we get in, after a long day of work, I might have to start prepping some meals for lunch or breakfast the next day. And before you know it, 30 minutes, 45 minutes pass, and it's past my bedtime, right? So what I'm trying to do now is have a more set bedtime, but also be very clear on what I need to and want to accomplish before that time. Right. And then work backwards. Because the reality is, in my mind, especially because I tend to somewhat have time blindness, I think I could do it all. And it's 2 hours later. Yeah. Right. It's kind of a joke in the family, but it's very serious because then I don't mean to run out of time, but then you're behind the 8 ball and constantly trying to catch up. And then what do? Right. Yeah. Unfortunately, the answer is I sacrifice sleep. Right. And then I feel terrible about doing it. But I want to try and be more intentional. That's sort of my goal.
No, that sounds like a really good goal. And then one small little pro tip. So I did meal prep, which was great. I was really excited, but I put too much cinnamon in my dish.
Oh.
And I have to eat it for a whole month now.
Wow, that is some meal prep. Wow. Yeah. My meal prep usually only goes for about a week. Usually by then I'm kind of sick of it. But if you stretch it out more, then I've felt that before too.
So
nice.
I'll be eating that for the next not a month, but like three weeks. So, but yeah,
nice.
Awesome. Intentionality is so important these days.
It really is. All right, so we're gonna roll into today's main topic, and it's something that's near and dear to my heart, something really important to me that I wanted to bring up. So I'm excited to kind of introduce it as sort of our second topic, and it's really about just relationships and community. Something that, we've been chatting about in our personal lives is just sort of the idea of the loneliness epidemic, right? How nowadays we all feel so online and connected more than ever, yet we still feel so lonely, right? And how is that possible? There's going to be a bunch of subtopics that we'll dive into, and really talk about just, how important it needs to be, right? And the things that we want to take into consideration and be, as you said, more intentional about it, right?
Yeah.
So I'll kind of kick it off. As I was kind of thinking about it, preparing for the call in this episode, I was thinking about where are really the main sources of friendships that I've gone through in my life, right? And realizing, have I missed any? Right. So as I kind of go through my roster of friends, I have some very close friends, some that I've kind of maybe stepped away from either intentionally or unintentionally, right, over the years. As someone recently told me, it's not really anybody's fault. It's just our lives kind of take different turns. And sometimes we meet back up and sometimes we don't, right? But the reality is that for me personally, I like to think someone also told me once, it's never really goodbye, you know? I don't like to say goodbye to a friend like permanently, like ending a friendship, because you never know. Our paths may
Yeah.
cross once again, even, coworkers, you may end up at the same job again at a different company. You never know, right? But as I was thinking through, the main areas of relationships, I think number one probably starts with your family, right? Whether you like them or not, you're inevitably bonded to them, right? Which we'll get into later. Then the next real source, I think, as we all kind of grow up, it's really school, right? And the
Yeah.
interesting about it is that you go through different phases of school, right? Obviously, you go through elementary, middle school, high school, then you may go to college, maybe even graduate class and all sorts of other things, right? But then when you think you're done with school, if you choose to be a parent, it comes all back around. Suddenly your kids are in school and now you're becoming friends with your kids' friends and their
Yep.
parents, right? And the question is, how deep can those friendships go? Can they be very solid friendships, et cetera? And we'll talk
Yeah.
about that later,
Yeah.
right? And then the other three that I came up with was obviously a big one is work, right? Pretty much all of us, unfortunately, have to work to live, right? But we also make the best of it, right? So there's a lot of aspects around work that you take into consideration. You think about, do you continue to make the best of it? The next one, I think, as I grew older, which I've been trying to be focused on a little bit more, right, is really around hobbies, right?
Yeah.
And just things you enjoy doing, what your passions in life are, right? And then the last one, which I may even tee up to you first, that I realized, again, I was thinking about what areas have I completely missed in my life? And something that came about that I realized, I always understood and appreciated religion, but I myself with my family have never been religious. But I can see the community and the bond of relationships that religion can be beneficial, but could also be detrimental, right?
Yeah.
So,
I grew up with a heavy amount of religion,
yeah,
and it's intertwined with the culture and a lot of events, a lot of interesting stories, and then also leaving religion and how that's impacted people, or especially me.
yeah.
So
I'd love to hear a little bit more about it.
yeah.
So I guess how did you find your religion? So to your point, your family and parents and everyone were religious, so it's not like you really chose the religion, which is always a question, right? I know some people choose religion and gravitate or even change religions as they get older, but
Yeah.
I knew a number of friends as I kind of interviewed some folks, and they all said that they started out religious because of their parents, and many of them all fell away from it, right? So kind
Yeah.
of curious about your little story. How did that kind of impact you and maybe shape the way that you perceive your friendships and relationships now?
So that one is interesting because I guess for folks, I grew up in an Islamic household, uh, it within the United States, and Islam is I wouldn't say it's a rigid religion. It depends on the sect you're in, and the
Mm.
sect that my family is in, I guess you could say it's very relaxed or chill. So
Mm.
there's Sunni, Shiite, which everyone hears about in like the Middle East, and then like Sufism, which is not as common, but that's the one. Sunni and Sufism kind of go hand in hand a little bit. There's plenty of disagreements about what it all means. It's basically like Sunni believe in one lineage, Shiite believe in a different lineage of the prophet, and then
Mm.
Sufi is more of like a spiritual understanding. And the Turkish mosque that my family went to growing up was predominantly Sufi, but obviously they would not turn anyone away.
Mm-hmm.
We had all kinds of folks coming by from different cultures. Growing up as a kid, our Islamic holy day is Friday, which makes it hard in a non-Islamic country because
that's usually the time you go out and you socialize and you have fun and end of the work week.
Yeah, and the main gathering time in Islam on a Friday is actually in the afternoon around 12 to 2. And essentially your lunchtime, right? So a lot of folks, when I was going to college or when I would go with my dad, I was in high school in the summer, he would go pray on Fridays. There would be an imam who's like a spiritual leader, and they would give a sermon, about whatever topic that they wanted to talk about, but they would be giving it to a whole room full of people who are essentially all there at their lunchtime. And after that sermon was over, we would line up and pray, and then people would disperse and go back to work. So that was one aspect that made it harder to get together with people because it was on a Friday during work hours. And so the opportunity to hang out came on Sundays. So they would do Sunday school. So in Islam, the Quran is written in Arabic. So a lot of people didn't know how to read it or understand it. So they would teach all the kids there and then have the families come in to do like a prayer, lunch, or dinner kind of thing. And that is one aspect of the religious community that I grew up in. The other side of it is there are different holidays throughout the year, like Eid or a fasting month, which is Ramadan. In those holidays, you could almost say, so in Islam, you get good deeds for doing good things, essentially, right? Part of those holidays is you should go see people because it's a sunnat, or like it's a good thing to do. God favorably looks upon you for doing it. And going to different people's homes, as a kid, I didn't care. Right? I was like, from like 5 to 15,
do my
exactly.
own stuff.
I want to play video games. There were some families you go to that you knew that they had kids your age you could hang out and play with. But a lot of times I was going to people's houses that I had never met before. And in our culture, as you get older, by the time you hit 13, the men kind of separate from the women. The women hang out, the women hang out, talk their stuff, the men hang out and talk their stuff. And once you hit a certain age, you have to kind of engage in it too. So there were times where I'm sitting there with like my dad and like 3 guys with like a foot long beards, and they're talking about like religion or politics or whatever's going on. And I'm just like, I want to go home and play video games.
I think I wonder in hindsight, because it's funny now. That's you talk about and what I have found, something that has really reinvigorated sort of the connections and relationships in my life. I've even, I think, asked you on the side, have you noticed yourself trying to connect and build relationships with people younger than you and people older than you, right? So fortunately for me, at my work, I was able to join a mentorship program. So I got paired up with a mentor who was, a bit older than me, getting ready to retire. And there was a lot of interesting insights, right? I feel even as I was, working through the years, I can sort of see myself getting older, thinking, oh, how come these people are eating salads now and doing all these other things and being more preventative with their health? And then now I'm in that same spot. And all of a sudden now I understand a little bit more, right? And it's interesting, some of these, the advice that someone might give you, you may hear it, but it really depends on the mindset and the timing in your life, Does it really resonate with you at this time, right? Because reflecting back, you probably, whether you wanted it or not, right, you got exposed to things that were probably important that may even continue in your day-to-day now that you just don't realize, But without that sort of avenue for connection, where can you get that? Right? I mean, often, as you're getting older, or you go through the phases that I kind of mentioned, right? Like when you're in school, there's always a teacher. But again, there's a teacher-student dynamic, which just isn't quite the same. right? Then when you're at work, there's generally going to be a band of age, right? Like you won't really get access to someone super old or super young, right?
Yeah.
Until you, as you go through it, right? But it's interesting again that the perspective and dynamics that you can meet and learn from people, right? I think both of us being more growth mindset, it's really interesting to just absorb as much as we can, and that's really what I've been focusing on lately. Just hearing out people's stories and seeing and realizing I'm not so unique, right? Many of these things I'm bringing up, someone else has already hit that same problem and have even, persevered or figured it out and can give me a tip, you know? Whereas if I were to try and figure it out on my own, it'd be much more difficult.
Yeah. We're all essentially in the same boat.
Yeah.
We're all dealing with the same kind of problems or what have you in different ways, and people handle it in different ways. And some people, I feel lonely. Someone might say that and then go party. Someone
Yeah.
might pick up a hobby.
Yeah.
Someone might not do anything, and that's kind
Exactly.
of where the situation we're in today, I think, as a society as a whole.
Exactly. So I think one unique thing, anything you wanted to kind of wrap up with the religion aspect, or we'll kind of move on, up to you.
I think it's interesting having gone to college and then gotten less religious over time because my dad passed away. I moved away from my family, met a lot of people outside my culture that I talk to every day. And I realize, there's an aspect to it that I miss where there's people that I probably will never see again because I only met them through those communities. But I don't know how much I was getting out of it in the first place if they're not relationships that are spanning beyond it. Yeah. Like I have coworkers from my first job that I talked to today, and it's been 13 years and we've moved cross countries and stuff, right?
Yeah.
And we don't talk as much, but we still talk, like once a month, which is
awesome.
Yeah, which is surprising. But we built relationships. We had things in common. We also talked about the things that we struggled with. I think there's a little bit of misery in company.
Yeah.
And I think we bonded over that too. And that's probably why we're still together as a group today.
That's awesome. And it's incredible, to your point, nowadays with technology, right? I think that's some of the things that we're going to go into, which is the interesting thing about both of us, I think, is neither of us really are that engaged with social media. I mean, I have, a few here and there just to kind of keep track. I mean, I have Facebook just to keep track of friends' birthdays, but that's really about it, I don't really enjoy the aspect of social media. I realize it can be a lot of negatives, right? Constantly trying to compare yourself to other people. You're seeing only the highlights of their life. You don't really get to see all the downtimes or the struggles or the sacrifices that they make to be able to, do these certain events and activities, right? And everything just seems so glorified, right? And I feel like I want to have a deeper relationship with the, particular friends that I want to stay connected with, right? So I know, again, I think both of us have kind of strayed away from that. But kind of talking about some of those friendships that we had from school, I think it's interesting. I kind of reflect back, like I mentioned earlier, that I never really want to say goodbye. There are some friends that they kind of know, right?
Mm-hmm.
One of my good buddies from college, he said, "Hey, how is it that you remember to text me every year on my birthday?" And it's, we don't talk often, but it was an important friendship to me. I'm happy that it reminds me, and granted, I'm using technology to remind me, right? I'm not remembering off the top of my head, right?
Yeah.
Google Calendar will send me a reminder. I set, email reminders, but it's something that brings me joy, and I want to still stay connected. Now, could I be more intentional with their friendship? I probably could be. Do I ever really see this person? Not really. So I think the next kind of topic I would bring up is as we go into, some of our relationships with, school and work, right? How deep, and maybe talk a little bit more about the way that you stay connected, because what I have found is I have friends that I meet up in person. I have friends that we just chat and text. But what I realized is that the depth of the conversations that you could have just aren't quite the same, and part of the reason why, I'm so glad that we're taking the time to start this podcast is because honestly, just staying in contact with you,
Yeah,
We like
likewise.
you said, we talk every single day, but there are just certain topics, certain things that you just don't really hit, if it's just casually chatting. It's
Yeah.
not until you really, FaceTime or you video chat or even meet up in person. And, you know, we've met up with a few of our friends too, and we focused and, someone, took a minute to thank us for coordinating it because so much time can fly by, right? And unless we're intentionally trying to meet up, and how often do we meet with that group of friends? Maybe once or twice a year.
Yeah.
We try every month or a few months, but then with kids, people getting sick, we have work stresses, travel, whatever. It's just really hard to meet up, right?
Yeah.
But those times when we do make it, it just feels that much more important, right? And there's so much to catch up on, you know. But it
Yeah.
gives us an opportunity to really bond and connect, even for that short moment. So I'm kind of curious, you mentioned you have some college friends and some other, ex coworkers and things. Have you noticed, like, are you happy and content with sort of the level of engagement? How intentional have you been? Do you find yourself the one coordinating or starting it, or is it just natural where everyone kind of, chips in and helps lead and take some of that burden?
Yeah. So I think that's interesting because in high school, I guess for people who are listening, my group of friends sort of merged with my high school friends, and my college friends sort of merged.
Yeah,
And
similar with me.
and the ones that I keep in touch with today are essentially them. But it's interesting because the people that I grew up with in high school, who are now my lifelong friends, we didn't really hang out at all.
Back in the day.
Yeah, maybe I could probably count on my hand the amount of times that we actually hung out. We actually were all friends because we went on the same bus.
Yeah, see,
And
it's that connecting point,
yeah,
right? It's that one thing, and often could be work or a job or riding the bus together.
yeah. But ironically, back in high school, um, we all used to play video games, and I joined a voice chat server where some of my high school friends were hanging out, and we all became a lot better friends at that point. So when I went to college, I became better friends with the people I went to high school with.
Gotcha.
And then some of that bled into college life where I people that I met in high school, I also went to college with. We became really good friends, and through them, I met you and a bunch of other people. And then
we start to mesh our friendships and groups.
Yeah, the intentional part was like I realized that there are groups of us who are very similar, who have the same kind of thinking, who are I wouldn't say obsessed, but enjoy each other's company and
quite competitive,
and want to be better for sure.
Yeah.
And so that's when we merged these groups into one.
Yeah. But even with the merging of groups, I'm sure, even just from our friendship, right? Typically, there will be branches of the group, right? There will be offshoots where individuals will hang out with each other more often. Again, there's different affinities of likes and dislikes, right?
Yeah.
So it's always interesting, right? And even in certain friendships, I was listening to a training class at work, and it was talking about connectivity. This is more from the work aspect, right? But the takeaway that I thought was really important was that it was comparing relationships to plants, right? And the importance of it is that essentially every plant needs water and nurturing to grow, right? And what they were talking about was there are certain plants that in relationships that may, be dormant for a long time, but then every once in a while you water it. Once a year, you meet up, you have a quick call, and it can reinvigorate everything. It comes to life and it continues to grow and continues to live on. Right.
Yeah.
But then there's the ones where you may overengage, you may overexert it, and it just kind of fizzles out and just doesn't quite work together. Right. But the important thing about it is that for all relationships to become worthwhile, right, in the long run, you have to make sure you're investing the time and the attention that it needs. So it was really important to me because then it made me reflect on, am I assigning the right amount of time? Am I engaging with the people? Is there anybody that I regret, not spending more time with, So I thought it was really important to me, and it was a nice kind of takeaway.
That's interesting because like it is important to talk to people, especially the ones that you want to keep in touch with that you
Yeah.
haven't in a while. But it's also like it can be really easy when you do talk to some folks a lot for there naturally to be someone who will want to plan things.
Yeah.
And it's easy to let them kind of run it because
Yeah.
it's like, oh, well, I know they'll do it and I'll just wait for it. But
True.
sometimes, it might not happen. And I
Yeah.
think that is an important thing to understand. It's like not only you have to nurture the plant, but it's a relationships are two-way.
I agree.
And it can't be, one person trying to organize it all the time.
Yeah.
If you have a group of friends, take turns,
Yeah.
right?
It can be exhausting.
Yeah.
I agree with you. And I try to live life with no regrets, right?
Yeah.
But it is important, right? Like you said, sometimes as much as we want to meet up, sometimes the cards just don't play out,
Oh, yeah.
But the important thing is that we keep trying. Like you said, we keep in touch. We have actually found some very interesting ways more recently. I know that, well, I'm not really big into sports yet. We said, hey, let's just try and do a fantasy league. No money on the line, just have fun and keep in
Oh,
touch.
yeah.
And it's great. It was interesting, right? We all jumped on, video chat to do the draft. Had no idea what I was doing,
Chat
but
GPT to the rescue.
ChatGPT to the rescue, helped me pick out a team, and I have not watched a single game. I watch the numbers as they go, and sometimes I win, sometimes I lose, but it's exactly that, right?
Yeah.
How exactly do you find new ways to keep in touch, right? One of the ways that we've been doing also is as we've been kind of building out kind of our groups of friends, having a casual video chat every once in a while, right?
Yep.
We kind of have our little dude chat where a few of us just meet up and just catch up, because many of us have, to your point, dispersed. We actually don't physically live near each other, but
Yeah.
that doesn't take away from the ability that we can, spend the time to invest in each other in our relationship,
Right.
and then when we do actually meet up, it's that much better, right? We don't feel like we have to catch up on so much,
Or be awkward. Yeah.
or be awkward. Yeah. But so one of the things that I think was important, that I was thinking about was really, again, leading into this loneliness epidemic, and where, for me personally, this came more into focus was really around the pandemic. That's the
Yep.
elephant in the room, not only from our personal relationships, but also from my kids, right? So it's so hard to think about the long-term impact and effect on my kids,
Yeah.
just from the sheer lack of interaction. One of my kids was, already into elementary school. One of them was, entering into daycare, and it was just different. For a kid that age, you just don't know. We even, installed like a mini indoor playground set just because we didn't want to stunt their growth.
Yeah.
Our older son, we were so used to going out to the playground, meeting new kids, just interacting and having fun, right? Even if not, deep friendships, at least it's someone to interact with. But then when you're at home and you're trapped inside, it's really hard because you have nobody to interact with. And naturally, humans are social creatures, right? Some may be more introverted than others, but majority of people probably need to have some kind of human connection, right?
Oh, yeah.
To keep us going,
COVID, period of COVID just feels like a haze.
Yeah.
We were fortunate because 2020, kind of a lot of places went remote, but we were just, a couple together, and we didn't have our kids until later. But
Yeah.
it's such a huge impact on the social ability of kids and how they behave and how they interact with their parents versus how they interact with like strangers or other people that they meet on a day-to-day basis. It's kind of there's going to be a lot of research about the social and devastating social impacts of COVID and
let alone the learning capabilities and just growth.
Yeah.
But it really felt different. I don't think, I hope, knock on wood, I hope we don't go through it again. It may be inevitable, but the reality is that when it did happen, it was something new for all of us, right?
Yeah.
In America, as well as in other countries, some of them was really about just lockdown. Is that a good or a bad thing? You know, do you try to expose more people, which could lead to, deaths and suffering and even long COVID? Or do you try to, reduce the spread, right? And something that I did think about, and maybe we want to get into it a little bit, was how did the pandemic really influence your decision making when it came to deciding if you were going to meet up with people or not? So for us, right? Again, my kids were in school, so it was virtual remote learning. Do you still go out to try and meet up with friends? Right. I had some other kids' parents who were close with, but we weren't that close. They still had, they had a close knit group of friends where they were like, hey, we're just going to still meet up. Life is going to go on. If we get sick, we get sick. But they have their little corner, right? Whereas I didn't really feel like I necessarily had that with my kids and their friends, right? So we tended to shelter more in place. We tended to sort of be disconnected, and just partially out of fear of the unknown, right? We didn't know how serious or dangerous it was going to be. Many people were getting sick, and obviously we wanted to avoid that, right? But the interesting thing to me that I was thinking about was, some people, I think, instinctually and maybe unknowingly started to potentially draw a line, right? Of my friends, who am I willing to potentially get sick for? And I'm not going to call out any particular friends or even myself, but it's something that was very real, that you had to consider, because everyone had loved ones that were either, older, that were more vulnerable, as well as younger kids. You would never want to actually subject that to anyone, right? Just in case, right? Because you never really knew back in the day, right? We had all the COVID tests, but sometimes you could be asymptomatic and you would have no idea,
Yeah, and a lot of false positives. It's interesting about who you would want to get sick for. And I think it's interesting because during that time, we didn't hang out with a lot of friends, if any.
Yeah, neither did we.
For
we
the first year minimum, I don't think we hung out.
I don't think we did either.
Yeah.
We did family stuff. So, my kids were already around, right?
I think I want to say we canceled Christmas, not canceled Christmas, but like we didn't go to like a family Christmas event because we just weren't sure.
I think we did too. I remember, actually, I think that was our first FaceTime Christmas, because my parents weren't the healthiest. We're worried, and we never really know, right?
Yeah.
So we basically set up, our iPad and had it, in our room while we're opening presents and talking and conversing, and it was nice, but obviously not the same, right?
Yeah.
But you try and make the best of what you got,
Yeah. We ended up, doing the same thing with like a video call and doing presents and stuff like that, and then the following year, I think we either went or we got COVID and didn't go. We actually got sick. So I forget which came first, but it's unfortunate. But yeah,
nice.
It definitely puts in perspective who you want to hang out with, but also like, is it even worth it from a health perspective? Because now, people are getting long COVID and you don't know how sick they are and more susceptible to other things. And me being a diabetic, while I am younger than like an elderly person, like, you could hear it in my voice. I'm still recovering from a cold, right? Things just take a lot longer for me to get better.
Yeah.
And getting sick is just getting, a major illness.
Yeah.
Is just not worth it.
Yeah. So talking about exposure to people, one of my favorite topics. I am one of the lucky at work where we are subjected to return to office. Good old RTO. We won't go into the details of if that's good or bad, and maybe we'll save that and park that for a later time, right? If we talk about work, but something that I think about, like you said, just being exposed to people. I do have to go to the office, and I have watched a bunch of videos and learned about it, and I try and make the best of it, right? Do I want to go to the office? Not really. People, especially now during the season, people are getting sick left and right. I have to take a bus and 2 subways to get to the office. You're just going to get exposed to all sorts of stuff, right?
Yeah.
Now, you could argue that maybe, getting exposed to some of the weaker strands of stuff make you stronger, But fortunately, knock on wood, I've, been vaccinated I'm current on my vaccines. I haven't fortunately gotten sick. I try to minimize exposure. But the reality is, kids go to school. You're
Yep.
going to get exposed to germs, right? And you hope for the best, right? Even more importantly, you really got to sleep. That's one of the main, factors of keeping your immune system up, right? So kind of going back to that and why it's so important. But thinking back to work, right? And the RTO. One of the things coming out of COVID, to your point, as we both kind of sheltered in place and really just focused on our families, right? Something that resonated with me that I started to reflect back on was how much we invest in specific relationships, right?
Mm.
So we talked about our family, whether good or bad, you're ultimately bonded to them for life, right? Some may choose to move away from their family. Some, stay best friends, right? I think over time I've grown closer to my brother because as we've connected over, being part of the sandwich generation to take care of our parents, right? We often have to talk more just to, keep each other updated on the latest status or things that we want to do or try to help, right?
Yeah.
But the main focus for me was with the absence of many of my friends during COVID, right? Again, we'd stay in touch, but it was lacking and missing that real deep social connection. The main person in my life was my wife, my significant other, right? Obviously with my kids, but it's a little bit more difficult. It's a different dynamic, right?
Yeah.
So their main adult was my wife. And what I realized over time was that I was almost putting too much into that relationship. I was expecting too much. I was hoping for too much, right? And it's almost unfair in hindsight, right? It was someone obviously I care deeply about with, but can they ultimately be, the mother of my kids, my wife, my best friend, my confidant, my therapist and everything? And the reality is probably not, right? It wasn't necessarily something that she signed up for. So how do I find those other outlets, right? And what I've been trying to do is for work, how do I engage with more people to try and fill in those gaps, right? That way I feel whole. I'm able to keep myself going for what I need. Because oftentimes I think what my bigger struggle was earlier back was I didn't really know what I needed. I
Yeah.
longed for these connections, yet I couldn't tangibly say this is what I need, right? It just didn't feel right, you know? And the more I kind of yearned for it from my wife, the more she may even stray away. She's like, why do you keep asking me for these things? Like, I don't know how to do that either, right? Like, what do I do for you, right? And if we weren't
Yeah.
actively communicating, I thought it was something that I remember actively thinking about, Curious
Yeah.
if anything that you've maybe experienced anything or something similar.
So that's interesting. So my work, I don't work in an office. We didn't have RTO. Well,
Yeah.
they did, but I was luckily exempt. And so working remotely has been good and bad, right?
Yeah.
There's also all the benefits of working remotely. That's more comfortable. You're home,
Yeah.
get stuff done around the house. But, to your point, there is a huge lack of face-to-face communication.
Yeah. Those water cooler chats, right?
Water
Those
cooler
random
chats.
things, getting to know each other, right?
Yeah, just the random chats about random stuff. They happen online,
Yeah.
but they're few and far between because of the nature of it, right? Like we're only getting on calls to talk about work and not
Yeah.
to just shoot the shit and
Yeah.
just relax and see how things are going with someone else. And I think that whatever cultural environment you're in, corporate cultural environment, if you have the opportunity to do those things, like you should, log into a meeting 5 minutes early, and chat with folks, or,
Yeah.
if you're brave enough to, do a one-on-one video call with someone and with video on
Yeah.
and actually talk to them and ask them how they're doing, how's their day. You never know what you'll find.
Right.
And so that's something that a couple of us at work are trying to do more of, like hang out in like a chat room where we could
We've tried to do that too.
just chat about, let things naturally come up, or natural questions about different topics that aren't work related, to build that camaraderie, to build connections with other people. A lot of the times we end up talking about health related things, but it's just interesting to see, what you lose from having a remote job versus what you might get from going into an office. So there are benefits to both ways of working. Um, and as someone who is extremely introverted, who can be at home for long periods of time, like there's still times where I'm like, the day is over and I'm like, I want to go out, I want to do things.
Mm,
And my wife works in a place where she has, coworkers, and she's exhausted and she doesn't want to do things.
yeah.
And that can be really tough. So, the type of work you have can impact your source of relationships, but also can have an impact on other areas of your life, like family and relationships too.
Yeah. Some of the tips and tricks that we've done at our job is which again, to your point, you really got to reevaluate as it's going on. Is it still serving you? Right.
Hmm.
Some of our groups started having sort of an open conference call where people could just drop in and connect and just catch up, right? Almost like an active working session, right? The pros and cons of that is that sometimes you feel obligated then, and it almost defeats the purpose, especially if you're more introverted, like you said. Something that I thought was also interesting that I learned a long time ago was the importance of communication, right? As you communicate, I don't remember the exact details. Maybe I'll have to try and look it up later, but um, the actual words that you say, right, was a small portion of it. The tone obviously starts to influence and can change it, right? But then a lot of it is visual cues and body language, right? So the fact that you send a text message, you really only get something like 10% of the message, right? You
Hmm.
miss all the nuance and the tone. Then if you get on a call, right, you can often be so much more productive because you can at least tell the tone. You can feel the energy going through what you're saying. And then lastly, obviously, why it's so important for video. And again, even better would be in person, right? Because then it's very hard to hide your entire body language, right? And you don't realize how intelligent your brain is. You're picking up on these little cues, right? So for us, we have been trying to be more intentional with turning on our videos, right? Making sure that we are taking the time. Now I realize, as I've talked to, many coworkers, there can be, not discrimination, but sort of gender standards, right?
Hmm.
How do I look? How do I, am I cleaned up? Am I, dressed
Yep.
properly and whatever else, right? Different levels too. If you're certain titles, you might feel more obligated for certain things, you know, um, and just sort of that fear of needing to be perfect all the time.
Yeah.
But what we've tried to do, especially in smaller group settings, is to just be more vulnerable and realize, hey, and open up. you know some of your anxieties are the same as mine. Oh man, I didn't sleep well. My eyes are not looking great. My hair is all messed up, and all
Yep.
these different things. But if you avoid that, you lose out on so much of the communication and the message.
Oh
So
yeah.
it's really important for us that I think we've been focusing on. And then also one other quick tip that we have is we've kind of set up a water cooler chat or sort of a happy hour, right? Something that, like you said, you'd really only get if you're in person, right? You go out for a drink. So what we do is we set it up such that, it's for half an hour or so each week, a time where it should be relatively, free downtime for everybody, and everybody does their best to dedicate to it, usually on a Friday. And we sort of make it a no work call, right?
Yeah.
It's got to be about other stuff. Sometimes we'll bring in random icebreakers, random questions and things that you can kind of pull the audience and start to get to know each other. Um, and even for those that are maybe less chatty, like you said, more introverted, don't really want to engage, what we'll often do is we'll try and find sort of specific topics, right? And just tee it up with a multitude of a few questions, right? I think about it like on the radio, sometimes they'll have kind of these topics where they'll bring up a whole bunch of questions that you want to try and answer, right? And that gets you going, right? Because often it's hard. It's like, hey, how was the weather? Right? It's kind of very dead end conversation, right? So learning to be able to keep a conversation going, I think is really important, right? And teach you to be able to feel more comfortable, engaging and having these kind of conversations with your coworkers. And like you said, learning so much more about each person and building that relationship. But yeah.
I think it's funny, like being able to the importance of being able to keep a conversation going is critical to the attraction part, and like being able to, keep the interest engaged with
Yeah.
another person. But there's also like silence is powerful, right?
Yes. That is something I'm still actively working on. Thank you for reminding me. Talking slower, being silent, not interrupting. It's a work in progress.
Yeah, I am someone who enjoys the silence. I can stand in an elevator and just with like people and not say a word or just, you know, uh, but I also understand that that can be awkward for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And in this day and age, I think people are more likely to feel awkward and not want to talk. But, it's definitely interesting how different everyone is and what their level of social engagement is and how they go about it.
Yeah. All right. So running through the sources of relationships. So we didn't really talk too much about family. I don't have anything too particular. I think, again, that's probably for another time, right? That's a whole can of worms to unpack. We talked about kind of school. We talked about work. We talked about religion. So I think the last one, for those out there, this is also something that has been sort of a focal point, is really just around hobbies. One of the most common that people I've seen naturally, and I don't actually do this, and I think maybe you have a little bit more, is really around the gym, just gym culture. Can be very supportive, right? Even if you don't know what you're doing, you often find that people at the gyms are very friendly and hopefully willing to help, and it kind of builds a camaraderie. I watched a video talking about the boom of CrossFit, right? And why did it mean so much for people to feel almost proud to say they were part of CrossFit? It's because of the community.
Yeah.
Everyone was there with a sense of betterment, of improving themselves, right? And that bond was almost building just, people that can keep you accountable, people that can keep you motivated and keep going, right? Because what I realized is it's really hard to do it alone,
Oh, yeah.
right? Trying to keep myself going, I make those poor choices. I choose to eat that bagel when I really shouldn't, it was just this week, you reminded me, it's like, oh man, I don't feel so great. I really need a bagel. He said, are you going to, at least it's great that you acknowledged it. I still ate the bagel. But I'm getting better. At least I'm identifying my emotions now,
Yeah.
But things like hobbies, right? I'm kind of curious. Have you, met anybody? Obviously, I think the most common thread for us is just video games, right? But
Yeah.
outside of that, are there any other kind of areas that you found, hobbies have really helped you connect and build friendships?
Well, just going back to the CrossFit thing. So during COVID, CrossFit suffered a lot. Because of the in-person nature of all the workouts. And Peloton got really big because
another big one.
What they have is very interesting. It is a online aspect to cycling. And I don't know if for people who haven't done it before, you can log into a live class with other people and you don't really see them, but you see like their avatars on the side in like a leaderboard, and it measures your output in like kilojoules, which is like a cycling metric. As you're riding through the workout, the instructor is talking to you live, and it looks like they're talking to you, and you can high five other people and congratulate them, but you don't really talk to them. But it provides a sense of I guess that goes back to like the Misery and Company, right? Like you're all working out, you're struggling,
all suffering.
This ride is hard, but we're going to high five over it because we did it.
Yeah.
And you feel really good after. And so Peloton got huge in COVID because of that. Post COVID, we're not going to talk about their stock, but there's the people who do Peloton generally like will really push for it and tell you like, oh, it's amazing. It's the same thing with CrossFit because it's just it's a culture. And Peloton also has live classes in person in like studios where you can.
Yeah, I've seen some gyms too where they have dedicated Peloton stations and areas, right, where it's all ready for you.
And it's interesting as well because they tied in the social media aspect. All their instructors are like famous people on social media. They're influencers. They push them to be popular and like. If someone does Peloton, right? Like there's like groups like Ben's Army, he's like a DJ, who does Peloton and stuff. So, or I think he's a DJ, but anyways, like it's interesting how they've marketed it to fill that void of community that you might not get if you're not going to a gym anymore.
Yeah.
You can get it from your own home.
Interesting. Thanks for sharing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
But yeah, gym culture has always been friendly from my perspective. Um, being said, I am a man, so how it is for women can be completely different.
That's true.
But in terms of like the bodybuilding culture, like I remember going to work out in the gym, and there would always be the same group of guys, and we all got to know each other. We never really hung out outside of the gym, but we were always there, those same days of the week, the same times. And you build a sense of like trust, right? Like, oh, like, hey, can you come spot me for this lift, right? Because we kind of know each other. And
Kind of know your personal best when you're pushing, when you need
exactly.
that little nudge to go over.
Yeah. And COVID definitely destroyed a lot of that too. But it is definitely, the gym culture is definitely a great place to start if you're looking to make friends. Just you're bonding over trying to be better and be healthier.
Yeah, awesome. I know some of the, I did watch some videos recently where they were talking about again, it was a podcast between Hassan Minhaj and Roy Wood Jr. And Roy Wood Jr. talked about his mom and how she was very specific about her friends. It was her book club friends. It was her, pottery friends, maybe cooking class friends. And each of them sort of had very specific roles, meeting the needs so that way, if she needed to do something, she would just go to those group of friends, right? And sometimes they don't always mingle across the board. But then there's sometimes you have those, ride or die kind of friends that go way back that you just bond with and across the board, right? And I think what I've been trying to do is find those passions, right? Because like you said, it's very easy to get caught up with just the daily grind of work, taking care of your kids. There's just not enough time in the day, How do you find time to take care of all these things that you want to do? I know by the time I meal prep, try to fit in a workout, try and take care of the wife and kids, and then also my parents, there's just no time for me,
Yep.
How do I, something that I learned from therapy, I kept saying, hey, I'm okay. I'm managing, right? And the challenge that was given to me was, well, if you're managing, how do you flourish? I said, man, that's a tough question, But I really started thinking about it and reflecting that for me to really give out the best version of me for other people is to be somewhat more selfish and what are those things that I really need to be able to grow and be happy. And, some of those things can get, you can get caught up very quickly and very easily. Right? Again, the day runs out of time. Are there specific things you wish you had done more? Right? I know some friends that are really big into art. I am not very artistic, right? But if that is, soothing and relaxing, great. Like you said, we're very competitive. Sometimes we're playing a brand new game, and we get into it and, we bond over that, right? There's a lot of places where you can have board games. You can meet up with people. Maybe it's, drinking is not the healthiest, but even just the bar aspect, right? Allows you to meet new people. And that you never know might be, a great kind of position in your life for the long term, There was a video I watched. They talked about this where, again, as an adult, we, kind of went through the groups of possible places to meet people, right? And the absence of, obviously family is family, right? With school, once you graduate school, that kind of avenue dries up. Unless you become a parent, then again, it kind of recycles and now your kids are going through it and you may or may not like the parents of your kids' friends, right? Work is work, but again, may, start and end with your job, especially as you get into older ages when you retire. That'll be another topic for another day, right? And then religion, again, is always kind of there if you choose to stay in it. But for those hobbies, right? How do you find these new things that you enjoy, right? And are there things that you want to set more, time to, right? So, I've taken cooking classes because I wanted to learn some skills, meet some people there. Again, playing games has been a lot of fun. Even, as we kind of learn new games, there's always new games and things to play. But something I watched was they actually, I don't remember the exact word, but a couple was like, they were international, right? So they came to America, and in their culture back home, there is this concept, again, some word where it feels like it's a very, living room kind of setting, right? Where people could feel comfortable to come and meet, socialize, catch up, talk. and they basically set that up as like a meeting area in the town, right? It was almost a safe space where they offer food as like a mini cafe, but it was set up in a fashion that is very casual, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you can kind of go there, hang out with the intention that you might strike up conversation, which is kind of like a coffee house, right? But
Yeah.
even more so because they have games to play, they have things that entice you to bond and make relationships. Now, I've never actually gone to one. I thought it was a fascinating idea. I don't know if I ever will go to one, right? But um it's interesting to see that if you really are struggling and you kind of long for that friendship, right? How can you try to improve that situation?
Yeah.
Right? And lastly, something that I've been trying to teach my kids is, I don't remember where I learned this from, but as some of the younger generations really struggle with this loneliness epidemic, right? They say, hey, how do I meet friends? How do I make friends? Right? And the video I watched talked about how one of the most important parts of, why someone was popular, right, was because the people really wanted, I can't even remember it correctly. The people that were most popular were the ones that really wanted other people to get to know them, or was it the other way around? Basically, the moral and the takeaway that I got from it was, to find a good friend, you have to be a good friend first, right? You have to kind
Yeah.
of position yourself for people to want you to be their friend. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it was almost like the popular people were not popular just because they're awesome. It was the fact that they were putting themselves to be likable, right? And it makes it even easier for the other person to want to be their friend, right? So
Yeah.
it's important to think about the image and the energy that you're exuding, right? And giving off. Is it welcoming and inviting, Because a lot of times you don't realize, oh man, what kind of energy am I giving off,
Yeah. Yeah. It's going back a little bit. It's interesting when you mentioned like your kids having friends and their parents,
Yeah.
and I think that going into a topic that can be a whole thing, but sports is huge for kids
Yeah.
and their parents, because if you're a sports fan, sports is religion, right?
Yeah.
And you can build cultish followings off of teams, off of your kids are on a team, you have practice twice a week, you have matches or games or whatever, and your parents meet up, you make friends that way. You have end of the season parties or different activities in clubs, and that's interesting because depending on the type of person you are, if you didn't grow up doing that, um, it's an opportunity to get out there and make friends that way through your kids. Uh, Being able to um, go to a sporting event, you're sitting in a crowd, you're watching, you're all bonding over it.
Yeah.
It's really easy to strike up conversations there. I watch my sister do it all the time with her kids when they were playing soccer or basketball,
I was
whatever.
going to say, I know you're into soccer, and they talk about sometimes those rivalries, right? You will ride or die, and any of
It
those
is
big
ride or
sports.
die.
You know what I mean?
It is. Sports is religion.
Yeah. We should add that as one of the options. Yes.
Yeah, it's
true.
a big deal. It can be a big deal for a lot of people, and I know people who have made long-term friendships because their kids played sports young, and as they got older, you're just constantly at the same stuff.
Yeah, you naturally just spend a lot of time together,
Yeah,
right? And again, the body language and the bonding, just
that
that
helps.
common thread.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, we're getting to the end. Let's kind of run back one of our segments that we like to think about, which is the rabbit hole. What in the past week or so did kind of grabbed your attention and wouldn't let go, and you kind of dug a little too far, maybe?
So last episode I talked about swimming, and I was literally watching hundreds of videos, not hundreds, but a lot of videos of swimming techniques and breathing patterns and how to kick and the stroke, the catch and the pull and everything. Despite all of that, like, I can't swim and breathe at the same time. Like, I have struggled turning my head to breathe. And I go to a pool, and I had been practicing for like an hour and a half a day, multiple times a week. The pattern to like turn to my head to the side and breathe. I kept doing it, and it was really funny because it created a social interaction where, you know, at the end of my workout, I'm getting ready to change, and there's a guy in the locker room, and he was coaching kids earlier, and he comes up to me and he goes, "Hey, like, you know, just straighten when you go ahead and turn your arm." You know, he's like, I've been watching you practice, and like, you have what it takes. You're actually overthinking it." And he was saying, when you go to turn your head, keep it tucked near your shoulder and kind of just turn your chin so that you're looking sideways and not trying to lift your head out of the water, right? And it's funny that, you know, me doing a solo activity helped create
build a
social relationship.
Yeah.
But also like, what was I going to say? It helped build a social relationship, but it, you know, it was a rabbit hole that I delved too deeply in, and I probably didn't need to. You know, I probably should have just watched a video or two on like how to turn, and then just, you know, jumped in a pool and just tried to figure it out instead of watching like 40 videos about it.
That is true. I think it is important just to, you know, try it and get into it. I am a also common overthinker, right? But swimming specifically, I'm hoping obviously for the best for you, because like you said, you're gonna need to swim for your triathlon. So to your point, making sure that you make best productive time and use of your time, you know. For me, I did spend a little bit of time playing with my to-dos. So something as we're getting into the end of the year and into the new year, goal setting, reevaluating just, you know, what's on our agendas every day. And as I mentioned, right, as we get to the end of the night, I try and minimize, you know, something I've been taught through therapy is to really just reduce it just a few things each day. Right. Because at the end of the day, that list just keeps growing and growing. It's never ending. Right.
Yeah.
So the new sort of thing that I spent a little bit of time on was trying to play with automation. Right. So there's so much technology out there. There's so many ideas. And working with AI, it kind of gave me some ideas to set up some automation. Right. One of the things that I always wanted to do that, again, I kind of unfair for my wife was we'd be driving and I'd say, "Oh man, write that thing down. I want to remind myself." And she reluctantly pulls out her phone and text messages me. Right. And I know that it's annoying, but I didn't know how else to do it. Right. I tried to use, you know, the different software, you know, some of it, you have to pay for this, you have to pay for that, or it doesn't quite work. Right. And I can't centralize all of them. Right. So I finally found some way to do it. And the funny thing was, as setting up the automation, it said you have up to 1,000 credits a month. I was like, oh, that's a ton, right? And I'm barely going to be using this. Okay, so I set it up. I ran 2 tests, and I kind of forgot about it, right? And because I've sort of found other ways I haven't quite, you know, invested enough time into it. But then all of a sudden I get an email saying, "You are nearing your limit. You have almost used all your credits." And I said, "What happened?" Right? The funny thing is when I was setting it up, it said, "How often do you want to trigger this?" And it said, "Every 15 minutes." And I said, "Sure." And then I realized even though I wasn't doing anything, it was still scanning and checking for it. So I was magically hitting tons and tons, and I'm not even near the end of the month, and I've already accrued way too much, right? So we'll see. Maybe I'll pick it back up. It's definitely something I know I need to improve on and try and work on. But spent a little bit more time than probably needed, and hope I can make something out of it. But yeah. All right. We'll do one other thing, which is how did we get here? How close are we to the original topic at hand, or how far do you think we deviated?
I think we did a lot better job of staying on topic and being appropriate.
Yeah.
We went through a lot of different aspects of community and relationship building, from like mentoring and social media addictions and trying to keep up with your neighbors, keeping up with the Joneses, as they say. But, you know, they were all important things, you know, like messaging and the importance of like
communication
and contact, the body language, the different aspects of how can I meet people, you know, whether it's like gym culture or, you know, making an intentional choice to be more selfish about the things you do to help other people to be better and help other people too, right? You know, they always say like help yourself before you help someone else, right?
Yeah.
So
It's true. Awesome, man. All right. And to wrap it up, something we were thinking about that we want to encourage our listeners and just others to do is maybe just reach out and just text one person you haven't spoken to in a month just to say hi, right? Just
Yeah.
check in, see how they're doing, and just reach out. You never know. Sometimes someone just might be longing for that relationship also. And breaking the ice is a nice way to kind of revive that and bring it back and just nurture that relationship a little bit more.
Yeah. People are consumed with their lives today, and we make a lot of assumptions about whether someone is busy or doesn't want to talk to me or whatever.
All the time,
It
right?
it, it doesn't matter. Just send the text.
The only way you really know is to communicate,
Yep.
right? Because often the absence of the communication, I agree with you. You start to wonder, oh man, they don't have time for me. They're too busy. They don't want to talk to me,
Yeah.
right? May be true, but you'll never know until you really ask, you know? So
Exactly.
awesome, man. Let's wrap this up. Thanks as always. And it's awesome talking to you. We'll catch
Yeah.
you on the next one.
It was great talking to you as well.
All right. Take care.
Take care.